Well, hi guys, it's that time. It's our Monday story. Today I'm going to call this my Monday horror story. I want to tell you about a funeral that I was asked to guest speak at to comfort and represent the family. Now, unfortunately, a gentleman who demands to be called Reverend, according to his business card, someone in the family asked him if he could officiate the funeral. So I was co-officiating, if you want to call it that, with this Pastor Poopy Pants. Now I want to talk about this horror story because I want to bring some correction to some church leaders that do funerals, and they need to really do a heart check on why they do what they do and how they're treating people as they're doing the things that they do. And I want to warn and give advice to listeners so they can be protected and not fall into something like this with either a friend or family member of their own. You know, when we love people the way that God loves them, we want to provide and protect them. We provide them with a good future and protect them from anything bad happening. And that's what this teaching is about. Let me start by saying this. I've known this family for 28 years. Most all of the family, not the gentleman himself that had passed, most of them have worked for me in my restaurants, and I'm not talking about one or two people. I'm talking about 15 or 20 of them. His wife worked for me for over 10 years, one of his daughters 12 or 13 years, one of the other daughters, two granddaughters, his two teenage sons from the age of 14, 15, all the way up into their early 20s worked for me, cousins and nephews, just different people, right? So I know all of these nice people, and I call them my friends, by the way. So they expected their loved one to pass. He had been sick for a while, okay? But they did not attend church. They're not members of churches, of any specific church, so they did not have their own pastor, okay? So that sets up a problem sometimes for families when it comes that time, right? And so one of the distant family members says, well, my pastor has preached 3 funerals in our family, our big family, and he could probably do it. So he calls this pastor Reverend. But the two ladies, the wife, the man's wife, and his daughter call me and ask me if I would do the funeral service. So now we got 2 people officiating one funeral, which is no problem. I've co-officiated funerals before, but it wasn't okay with Reverend to co-officiate. He was highly offended by that. But let me go ahead and give you some more details. So this family, since they didn't go to church, and I want to go ahead and talk about this, because this hits on what I need people to take away from me talking about this, okay? When a pastor of a church finds out that someone don't have their own home church or their own pastor, that person, most of the time, automatically assumes that the person that died is not a Christian, they're not saved, and they're in hell. And the next thing they believe is that the family members are not Christians, and he needs to teach or preach a hell and damnation message to warn people about going to hell. So that's, and here's what happens, when they come and they show up, they judge your deceased loved one, they judge your family, and the kids and grandkids and even the neighbors, the co-workers, everybody that shows up is just a mark that they need to preach a hell damnation message to, okay? Now, I want to talk real quick to any pastor or leader that's listening to me. You can do a very, very quick heart check. It's really easy. If you're doing it so you can make money, my fee, when they talk to you, oh, my fee's $500, you need to stay at home because you're not doing it for the right reason. I'm not saying that you can't receive a love offering. I generally do not. You can, but you should never let that be your priority conversation of, well, my fee's $500 because you're telling them if you can't afford me, I'm not doing it. Okay, so stay at home. Don't come. Okay, let them find someone who has the right heart, because the word pastor means shepherd. We're supposed to shepherd people. We're supposed to love them in the time of grief. Okay, shepherding is not going to beat them up, not to fleece them of their money or beat them over the head with a hell and damnation message, okay? Here's a good spot for me to stop and say this. Did you know our Bibles do not say that we draw men to God through hell and damnation messages? It says that the goodness of God draws men to Him, draws men to repentance. Here's another one. It does not say that we are in the ministry of condemnation. We are in the ministry of reconciliation. That means bringing peace. Okay. We should never be showing up at funerals so that we can thump our Bibles and preach a hell message to people. That's the wrong place and the wrong time and the wrong motive. There's your 2 heart checks. What are you wanting money and doing it for money? And are you doing it because you love people, or are you wanting to warn them about going to hell? We need a heart check. Okay, now for families, if you want to have someone come and do a funeral for a loved one, and you're not a member of a church and you don't have your my pastor on speed dial, ask the funeral director who they would recommend. And you can tell them, we want a Christian funeral, well, but we do not want someone that's going to preach a hell and damnation message, because it's your loved one's funeral. You get to decide that, not the people at the funeral home or the Pastor Poopy Pants that shows up. I would suggest that you get 2 or maybe 3 names and you talk to that person, maybe on 3-way with another family member. I prefer that it be 2 to 4 family members talking to who's going to officiate. And don't commit yourself, okay? You just talk to them, and when you get through, the 3 or 4 family members, y'all talk and say, are we comfortable? Is this the one we want? Will they represent our loved one the way that we want them represented? And then if you do choose a person and you tell them, yes, we are comfortable with this, it's okay to ask them if they have a certain fee they want to charge or what their expectation is. But here's the thing, you do want to make sure that they love you enough that they're asking you questions about your loved one who has passed, about your friends and families. Well, I'll tell you. You know, I've got about 6 years of Bible college, and in one of the colleges I took a ministry course 1 year. And one of the courses inside the ministry course was family bereavement. And we were taught how to talk to people, how to treat them, things not to say. By the way, Pastor Poopy that did this funeral, he needs that class. He was the most prideful, arrogant, unfriendly, self-centered, offensive person that I have met in many, many, many years. I would never, ever go to his church and listen to any sermon he ever preached, because he is operating out of a judgment, condemnation, pride ministry. That's strong, but it's true. So I hope that I have helped you with this. But now, before you let someone get up and say just anything because you trust them to do the right thing, it's perfectly okay for you to say, now when you speak on behalf of my beloved one, what are you planning on talking about? What are you going to say? And you just get an overview. Guys, you don't have to know word for word, okay? But you should know kind of what they're going to talk about. Now, when I meet with families, the first thing I do is I just let them talk and get comfortable with me. And then out of the blue, just on the spot, I'll say, tell me your favorite memory of John. And they'll be like, oh, well, I remember, because I don't want them to go home and think about it. I want that spur of the moment. And then I'll ask them, what's the funniest thing you've ever seen him do? Then I'll ask a different family member, what is the kindest thing he's ever done for you? Another family member, what's the sweetest thing he's ever said to you? Things like that. And then you get all of these wonderful stories that you can bring into your message. And now you've honored the person, right? You've loved him and you've honored that person, and you've brought comfort and peace to the family who's going through the grief, right? So with this pastor, I'm going to talk about this just a little bit, because I've talked to you about how pastors need to do a heart check, how people can protect themselves from getting a Pastor Poopy in the pulpit and blowing a funeral that will hurt the family and give you bad memories from now on of that event, because that's what happened last week. So when the gentleman gets there, he's real arrogant, and he's all in his cowboy boots, his cowboy hats, and it's not about getting to know people. The star of the show has shown up, by the way. And so he did not talk to this gentleman's wife or his daughters or sons, okay? The next day, he didn't even recognize them or know their names, and didn't even remember their positions in the family. Walked up to the daughter again and said, well, who are you? And she's like, I'm his daughter, and you met me yesterday? So these are scary things that I'm talking about today. This gentleman and I, because I'm officiating the funeral with him, I have to talk to him. I spent almost an hour with him. And he was highly offended that, number one, he was having to share the pulpit. He don't do that. And he was also offended that I was a female and they had the name Reverend by my name. Now, I did just tell him out of the blue. I said, oh, I'm not a reverend. I am a Bible teacher. I travel and speak and guest teach. And he's like, oh, well, I'm glad to hear that, because women pastors, no. See, they can't be over churches. That usurps men's authority. So he had to correct me on that. And he asked me 3 different times what I was going to talk about, but he never let me answer. He would ask me a question and keep on talking about himself. What are you going to talk about? Oh, well, I can tell you, I already know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the prodigal son. Because, people wander away from God. And, I don't know that fellow over there, pointing to the deceased. And this is how he's talking about someone's beloved one. I don't know that fella over there. And he said that more than once, by the way. He told me how many. I've preached hundreds of funerals. I've got hundreds of. I can't even tell you how many people I've gotten saved. And then he's told me how many years he's been in ministry. He also had to brag to me about how he bought the land and the building, and he owns the church. So nobody can tell him what he's going to preach or not preach. This is the most prideful, egotistical person that I have ever had the displeasure of sitting with for an hour, having to listen to him brag about himself. He would say, well, I don't mean to be bragging, but, and here it would come. Or, I'm not trying to make myself look big or anything, but I've been a pastor now for 47 years, and I've just, and it's just on and on and on. He talked about himself most of the time instead of getting to know the deceased or the family. And that came back to bite him in the rear end, right? On the day of the funeral, he gets there and he's still just seated in his pride of he's the pastor. And he, by the way, has a business card and he demands to be called Reverend. That's another thing to add to your list if you're looking for someone to officiate a funeral. If that person is so egotistical that they demand that everybody, and some of them even their spouses, have to call them Reverend, Pastor, or Bishop, take heed. That person can very easily be walking in pride, and what comes with pride is judgment. And guess who he's going to be judging on that day? Your loved one and everybody sitting there at the funeral. Now, so the next day, I'm going to go a little long today, but I want to tell you, this man fell on his own egotistical sword because he didn't care about the family. He wasn't there to shepherd and love them and help them through the grieving and represent the gentleman the best that he could. He gets up to do his part of the message, which he changed, by the way. That's the good part, because he thought that the gentleman was not a Christian, but I got to throw a few things out that made him believe, well, maybe he is. So he said that he was glad that he found out that the man was probably a believer and he could call him brother, because he's had to preach these atheist funerals. And he even told me on the couch, he said, I preached an atheist funeral 3 weeks ago, and that guy might not have believed in God, but he does now, but it's too late. He's in hell. You don't want people like that representing your loved ones, guys, okay? So this gentleman gets up behind the podium, and he calls the man Jim 5 times in a row, and the man's name isn't Jim. I can't think of anything more embarrassing than to not even know the name of the person you're representing and talking about. So I'm going through my bag because I'm sitting behind him on the little half bench up at the front. And I'm circling the gentleman's name and trying to slide it under his arm so he will quit calling the gentleman by the wrong name. Before I can get his attention, the son speaks pretty aggressively and loudly and says, "Who are you calling Jim? My daddy's name isn't Jim. Who are you talking about?" And so the gentleman's wife says, "No, my husband's name isn't Jim. His name is so-and-so." Now, at the same time, I'm trying to get his attention. They're correcting him. One of the daughters and her daughter, the granddaughter, get up leaving crying because they can't take any more of this man who's got up there bragging about himself, about how many years he's been in ministry, how many funerals he's preached, all of that, and he's calling the person by the wrong name. So finally, when he shuts up and sits down, I'll end my video with this today. The music starts playing again, one of the songs, and he leans over and tells me, "Oh, well, that's the first time I've ever had anybody correct me in my pulpit." He was offended that the family wanted the correct name to be used at their beloved one's funeral. Guys, I know I went long today, but I hope and pray that I have given you some really good advice so that this will never happen to you or anyone that you may know. I love you, and I will see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye.